you so much for joining me. My name is Kate Thompson, and this is our latest episode of A Lesson in Real Estate. I wanted to talk to you today about real estate appraisals in the city that I live in, Memphis, as well as in lots of other places around the country. The real estate appraisal process is becoming important for our local officials, city and county officials, as they prepare to assess the amount of taxes that people are paying on their real estate, whether that is residential or commercial. And it is going to possibly affect, what we pay as far as taxes. So our tax rates could go up or they could go down depending on these assessments. The assessments are usually ordered by our property assessors, and we can usually see that information within a few months after the assessment has been completed. And then usually if we have a mortgage, we'll get a notice from our mortgage company. If we have a traditional setup where your mortgage company puts aside interest and your property taxes and insurance aside in an escrow account. I said interest, but not interest, just your property taxes and insurance. And so if there's going to be an increase in that and you have or are going to have what they call a negative escrow balance because of the possible increase or the increase in the tax of the taxes due to the appraisal, then typically you get a letter in the mail that says, hey, you can pay this one lump sum and that will allow us to keep your mortgage payment the same. Or you can pay a little bit extra and they'll tell you the amount. It's already predetermined each month, starting with the particular month, so that you can cover the shortage in your escrow should the property taxes go up. The same thing happens when there is an increase in your property insurance rate. And on the flip side of that, your property taxes could possibly decrease. And if that happens and there's a surplus in your escrow account, then you will be able to get a letter as well if you have a mortgage. And it's, like I said, a traditional FHA mortgage that's set up with an escrow account attached to it. They will say, hey, you have a surplus in your escrow account. It is due to your taxes, the property taxes that we're collecting for you. We collected too much. And so we're going to either send you back this check and you can apply towards whatever you want, meaning something personal for yourself that's not your mortgage, or you can go ahead and, use it for the next payment or what have you. I strongly urge people who find themselves on the receiving end of a check because you have a surplus to go ahead and apply that to your principal balance. You can just send it back to your mortgage company and say, hey, I want to apply this to my principal balance. And it will shave off some of the time that you have left to pay off your mortgage. So it can be a benefit as well to have the city or county that you live in assess your property for the tax purposes. I'd like to officially start the program, though, by giving you a definition of what an appraisal is. The best definition that I could find for it comes from Investopedia. It's one of my favorite sites to go to for finance information. And according to Investopedia, an appraisal is evaluation of properties such as real estate, a business, collectibles, or antique items by the estimate of an authorized person. So someone who has studied what should happen in an appraisal process and has been certified to provide a value, gives a value based on their opinion of what's happening in your market, the condition of your property, and other sales in the area help determine the appraised value for a property. The authorized person must have a designation from a regulatory governing body for the jurisdiction that they're appraising in. So if you have a real estate appraiser that is only licensed for the state of Tennessee but doesn't understand certain regulations for other places, then it's possible that they can't do an appraisal in another state. Also, there's a difference between what we call a regular residential appraiser and a certified appraiser. Residential appraisers, or what I would like to call apprentice appraisers, those appraisers usually are completing their work under the leadership and advisement of a certified appraiser. The appraiser who is not certified is not able to do an appraisal on properties that are valued at $1 million or more. Those are actually reserved for certified real estate appraisers. And usually after appraisers have completed their studies and they have taken the necessary tests that they need to take to be licensed, they still have to work under a certified appraiser for 2 years before they're technically able to go out on their own. That's one of the things that have been put in place to make sure that we have properties that are valued correctly and based on the right things. So the Appraisal of Real Estate is actually a book that was published under the direction of the Education Committee for the American Institute of Real Estate Appraisers. And I have a copy that was copyrighted in 1951. It is a very old copy, but some of the items in the book still ring true today. And one of the things that I take from it that I thought it would be really valuable for today's lesson is that the value of real estate is created, maintained, modified, and destroyed by the interplay of three great forces. And these forces motivate the change and help to characterize the activities of mankind as it relates to real estate. These forces are social forces, deals and standards, and economic adjustments, as well as political or government regulations. All of those things have something to do with how your property is valued and, what it's worth on the market. Some of the social forces, for example, include population growth and decline. So whether a neighborhood or even a city for that matter is growing or shrinking has a lot to do with how your property is valued. That's a big thing. The size of families matters. When I first became a real estate agent, broker, I was searching a lot for 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes. Now I have more people that are looking for 4 bedrooms, 2 baths. So because families are, getting bigger and needing more space. Racial distribution is also another factor that plays a role in how your property is valued during the appraisal process. And we'll speak a little bit about that on a later show. And then religious distribution. People who tend to have similar religious beliefs in certain instances tend to stick together. Ideals toward educational and recreational goals also play a role in how real estate is valued. You have economic forces that include natural resources. So, whether a place can be settled as a homestead or even as a community, a subdivision, a lot of that is determined on how usable the land is. Are we able to put electricity on this land? Are we able to make irrigation possible so that we can have plumbing that's indoor and things of that nature? Industrial and commercial trends play a big role in the valuing of real estate. A lot of times you have neighborhoods that change over time. They may start out residential and become commercial or vice versa. You have some properties that can be grandfathered in, so they may be zoned residential, but they're sitting in the middle of a big commercial section because that property was kept up or whatever and was maintained. And so there is no reason to do away with it. Employment trends also play a role in how property is valued. Wage levels, the availability of money as well plays a big role in how properties are valued, because the availability of money in a neighborhood, so to speak, per se, is determining what services are going to be available there. What type of grocery stores, what type of shopping, if you're going to have movie theaters and things of that nature. Because at the end of the day, all of those are businesses as well, and they need to be able to see that there's enough activity in the neighborhood amongst the residents that they'll be able to generate a profit in their business. So that plays a big role. And then some of the political forces are more standard than what people realize. You have building codes and zoning codes that play a big role. Public health means a lot when it comes to valuing of real estate. You can have functional and even economic obsolescence, which is something we could talk about on another show. And then credit controls and government guarantees. All of these things, either individually or collectively, actually can affect the cost, the price, and other aspects of the valuation of an appraisal. So that brings us to the next question, which is, what can an appraisal help us to accomplish? As a buyer, it can help you to be sure that you're making an educated decision, that you're not paying too much for a property. It helps the lender mitigate loan origination risk. So before a lender lends you money, they want to make sure that someone looks at the property and can see that it's worth what you're actually paying for it. So that's a big thing. And in most cases, if a property doesn't appraise for what the buyer and seller have agreed to as in the purchase price, then they usually have to go back to the negotiation table and either figure out a price that's where all three parties, the seller, the buyer, and the lender can be satisfied, or something else has to happen. If they can't come to a meeting of the minds between the three, then usually the deal falls apart. The seller winds up having to wait for another buyer who is able to pay the price that he wants, and the buyer has to move on to a property that's going to, be appraised either at the price that they are looking to pay, or what their loan amount is for, I should say, or more. A seller could use a real estate appraisal to help them to determine beforehand what the market says their property is going to be worth. So it can protect them from putting their house out on the market and having it sit and sit and sit because they've priced it too high. They can also use an appraisal to determine the value of certain things that they've done in their house. Here's a couple of examples of things that people do to their homes and they think it's going to add a lot of value, and they're usually unpleasantly surprised when they get an appraisal back. So for an example, a seller will say, hey, I put on a new roof. Well, if your house needed a roof, it needed a roof. That's not an upgrade. So an appraiser is just going to say, hey, he has a new roof, and that's going to be it in most cases. And then other things that people do is they may put, granite countertops in a home in neighborhoods where none of the other houses have granite. If that's the case, then that granite isn't going to bring you very much value on your appraisal. One of the other things, which is a big misconception that people do, is they put in pools, they put in expensive doors, they do all of these things to the property, such as that, which are cosmetic. They may put in a new, hardwood floor. Those things do not necessarily bring you or add value to your property. They make it more appealing, so you have the opportunity to get more offers, but the value itself does not really come from you doing all of those things. If a house needs to have a floor replaced, then you need to replace the floor. That's not an upgrade. So those are kind of some of the things that buyers and sellers have misconceptions about that an appraisal will do, is just add so much money because they've done all these things. But you have to make sure that those things are consistent with what's going on in your neighborhood, and you have to make sure that you're doing things that are going to, truly increase the value. And a seller could ask an appraiser what some of those things would be. Now, an appraisal can also help a owner and even a buyer determine real property from personal property. So as a rule of thumb, anything that's attached to a piece of real estate is a part of it. Anything that can be unplugged, moved, wheeled away is typically not a part of it. So one of the misconceptions that we see a lot in the real estate industry between buyers and sellers is, a real estate agent may forget to ask for, say, the refrigerator for a property, and then, the buyer is just under the assumption that a refrigerator is just a part of it. Refrigerator is not considered an attachment. It is not part of the home. So a seller can take the refrigerator in most cases and in most areas, as long as that has not been written into the contract that is going to stay. That is one of the things that is most commonly mistaken as being a part of the structure or the property, when it really is what we like to call chattel, which is personal property. And so as it stands right now, those are some of the basics of real estate appraisals and how they work. If you wanted to save a few dollars as a buyer or a seller, you can enlist the help of your real estate agent to bring you comparable market analysis, or CMA is what they call it, and it will show you what homes are selling for specific areas that you're interested in, and that's whether you're a buyer or a seller. If you're looking for a more in-depth report, you could definitely speak to a real estate agent or a broker about commissioning them to complete a BPO, which is a broker's price opinion. And the main thing between a broker's price opinion and an appraisal is the broker's price opinion, or BPO, does not give make a statement of value, because of real estate appraisers, real estate agents, I should say, and brokers are not licensed to tell you what a property is worth. They can tell you what it could possibly sell for based on the activity that's happening in the markets in and near your property, but they are not going to be able to assign a specific value. So those are items that you could use in lieu of paying, an appraiser. And you can get that much more quickly if you enlist the help of an agent that's knowledgeable to help you to figure that out. So finally, I want to talk to you about the rules and regulations that appraisals and appraisers are governed by. And so they have a set of guidelines that they follow, which are called the Uniform Standards of Practice of Professional Real Estate Service, or Uspep. And they are generally the recognized ethical and performance standards for real estate appraisers and other appraisers. So they just don't govern the things that real estate appraisers do, but you have people who appraise antiques, like I said, people who appraise businesses and such. And all of these things, or all of these types of appraisals, are governed by Uspep. And Uspep was adopted actually by Congress in 1989. And I would like to point out that Uspep came about, or these standards were adopted because there was a big savings and loan crisis in the 1980s. And a lot of people lost revenues and their savings and things of that nature because of this crisis. A lot of it had to do with mortgages as well. And that is why these rules were adopted. The Uspep guidelines are just that. They are guidelines, and they are enforced through FIRREA, FIRREA. FIRREA is formally known as the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989. FIRREA is also the same set of guidelines that mortgage lenders and even real estate agents and brokers use to ensure that a buyer is going to be treated fairly and ethical, and that they understand everything that they're getting themselves involved with as it relates to lending and mortgage lending. So we all have some responsibility as it relates to FIREA that we have to adhere to. And so with that being said, those rules that I'm speaking about, the Uspep rules, are actually set up by two separate entities. They kind of work independently of each other and in conjunction with one another as well. So these two main entities, one of them is called the Appraisal Foundation, and it is the organization under which the Appraisal Standards Board operates. And the Appraisal Standards Board is the entity that actually writes the Uspep guidelines that appraisers follow. The Appraisal Foundation is actually the organization that sets up the educational requirements and the licensing requirements nationwide for appraisals. And then finally, we have another independent entity called the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is a bureaucracy that charters, regulates, and supervises all national banks and federal savings associations, as well as federal branches and agencies of foreign banks. So this organization is basically in charge of setting up, they set up and they manage the banking system. And so you can see why they would have a vested interest in ensuring that real estate appraisers are being governed by a certain set of standards that helps to protect their interests. So FIREA comes and is also managed through this same bureaucracy, which is the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is actually the organization that helps to push the idea and enforce the idea that lenders would not be able to go down the street to their good old boyfriend appraiser that they've known for 40 years, get them to push a value on a property so that they can make their loan. Now, as it stands, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency has stated that most real estate appraisers have to work with real estate appraisal management companies to be assigned at random based on different things, the areas that they cover, their fees, the type of appraisals that they do, and the type of appraisals that are required. Those orders for those appraisers are put into a system by a lender, and then they're randomly assigned by these appraisal management companies. And that is one of the things that they have done to ensure that you get a fair and unbiased appraisal. Now, that is not a 100% guarantee that will happen. We do still see instances where people feel like the appraiser was biased against them. And if that's the case, you can always use an appraisal that you use the appraisal process or the process to have an appraisal be reconsidered. Most real estate appraisers don't like to have their opinion challenged, but if you can find concrete information that shows that, it should be considered, then you should definitely submit that. And the way to do that, usually if you're purchasing a home and you're working with the lender, is to submit that information to the lender, and then they can go out to the appraiser and ask him to reconsider the value. Typically, there are three types of real estate appraisers or appraisals that you can acquire, especially if you're a residential home buyer or seller. The first one and the most common one that is used is the market value or the market approach. So the appraiser, if you're using the market approach, is going to go out and find properties that are as close to your property as possible, preferably in the same neighborhood or subdivision, that are going to be the same or about the same age as your property, the same square footage, in a similar condition, and they're going to assign a value based on the sales of these previous homes. Usually they will use 3 to 4 active listings and then 3 to 4 closed sales to show what the range or to assign a value to your home. That usually happens for existing properties that that are for sale. And then the next approach that an appraiser could take would be the cost approach. The cost approach is usually the approach that is used for new construction. And what they do is they say, okay, right now it costs this amount of money to put this type of floor in the structure. The drywall for this new home that's up and coming is going to cost this amount. And so they do that through and through until they're able to come up with a solid value based on the items that are going to be in your home or the new items that are there that are not being used. And then eventually, especially if you're buying in a subdivision, appraisals will move from a cost approach to a sold approach or a market approach, as long as they have enough comparables to do so in the new subdivision. And then finally, there are single family residences that have that are income producing, where someone owns the property but it's rented. And so if you have income producing properties, the appraiser uses the income approach because he does take into consideration that you're making rent off of that. He checks to make sure that the rent that you're charging for the property is, similar to or in line with other properties that may have be charging rent. And of course, they look at the condition and the size of the property and, appreciation and depreciation and all of those things as well to determine a value. Finally, usually for pieces of land or they're mostly used in commercial properties, you can get a narrative approach, which is where, and these, like I said, they're very rarely used, but sometimes an appraiser needs to basically tell a story and explain in great lengths why he came to the value that he came to. And so with that being said, you would use a narrative appraisal, one where you have to read and and there's, just like I said, great lengths and great detail that the appraiser puts into it to determine, to explain how he came up with the value that he came up with. So that is the basic overview of what an appraisal is and how it can help you in your quest to either buy or sell real estate, whether it is local or national. I hope that you consider that an appraisal is something of value that can help you to make a educated decision about, how to move forward in your real estate transaction. And with that being said, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on this newest episode of A Lesson in Real Estate. And my name is Kay Thompson. Until next time, take care.